Imagine waking up one morning to find that something perfectly legal yesterday could now send you to prison. No theft, no fraud, just possession of gold. In 1933, that's exactly what happened to millions of Americans. Within hours, the US government declared personal ownership of gold a crime. Ordinary citizens suddenly found themselves inside a story that would reshape global finance forever. America was already in crisis. The Great Depression had shattered the economy. Factories closed. Banks failed by the hundreds. Businesses disappeared. Families once secure now stood in breadlines. Each week brought new bankruptcies and deeper despair. People lost faith in paper money. Every dollar note felt fragile, a promise that could vanish overnight, but gold still felt real. Gold coins, bars, certificates, solid, heavy, incorruptible. When everything else failed, gold remained the one thing Americans could trust. It had always been that way. But to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, gold wasn't a symbol of safety. It was an obstacle. When Roosevelt took office in March 1933, the nation's financial system was frozen. Confidence was gone, and the US still operated under the gold standard, every dollar backed by a fixed amount of gold in reserve. For decades, that system kept inflation low and the dollar stable. Now it was strangling recovery. Under the standard, the government couldn't print new money unless it held enough gold to back it. But the vaults were emptying fast. After the 1929 crash, panic swept the country. Banks failed one after another. People rushed to withdraw their savings, not in paper, but in gold they could hold. By early 1933, the Federal Reserve's reserves were vanishing. Each day, more citizens demanded coins and bars. If that continued, the US would soon lack enough gold to support its currency. The entire system stood on the edge of collapse. To Roosevelt, the answer was clear and ruthless. If America was to survive, he had to break the link between the dollar and gold. First, the government needed control of all the gold still in private hands. It was unprecedented. No president had ever attempted such a move. But Roosevelt believed it was the only path to stability. With enough gold, the government could issue new currency, reopen banks, and fund programs to fight unemployment. Without it, the economy would continue to spiral. One problem remained. How do you convince an entire nation to surrender the one thing it trusts most? For generations, Americans were told gold was the foundation of prosperity. Many families kept coins from the California gold rush, heirlooms saved for hard times. To ask them to give that up, in the worst crisis in history, seemed impossible. Yet Roosevelt was determined. In March 1933, the government declared a national banking holiday, closing every bank for several days to stop withdrawals. When they reopened, new rules were in place, but fear persisted. Across the country, lines still formed outside banks. People wanted gold, not assurances. They trusted what they could touch. Inside the White House, Roosevelt's advisors watched gold reserves shrink week by week. They knew they were out of time. A decision had to be made, one that would change history. On April 5, 1933, Roosevelt sat at his Oval Office desk. Before him lay a single sheet of paper. Just a few paragraphs, but its impact would be enormous. Executive Order 6102, forbidding the hoarding of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates within the continental United States. Behind the formal title hid a shock. Every citizen, business, and bank was now required to turn in all gold to the government. The deadline, May 1st, just 25 days. In return, people would receive paper dollars backed only by the government's promise, not by metal in a vault. Exceptions were small: jewelry, rare coins, or gold for industrial and dental use. Everything else had to be surrendered. The price, $20.67 per ounce. No negotiation. Refusal meant a $10,000 fine, about 6 years' wages, or up to 10 years in prison. In a single stroke, Roosevelt had criminalized what had been perfectly legal the day before. Millions of Americans became potential lawbreakers, simply for owning what was once real money. News spread fast. Confusion followed. Was the government truly demanding people give up their gold? Could they refuse? Could they hide it? No one knew. Most waited for clarification. And in the days ahead, Roosevelt would give them exactly that, through one of the most intense propaganda campaigns in American history. But on the evening of April 5, 1933, a silent transformation had already begun. America had crossed a line, from a market built on private wealth to a system where the government held ultimate control over its citizens' assets. The confiscation itself was still to come, but the world's most powerful democracy had already changed forever. In the days after Roosevelt's executive order, panic turned to disbelief. For generations, gold had been the one thing Americans could trust. Stable, timeless, the very foundation of wealth. And now, their own government had made it illegal. People didn't know whether to laugh or panic. Some thought it was temporary, a short-term measure for a national emergency. Others sensed something deeper, a shift in the entire financial order. But Roosevelt and his advisors knew one thing clearly. Fear alone wouldn't make people give up their gold. They needed belief. They needed cooperation. They needed Americans to want to surrender it. The White House launched one of the largest persuasion campaigns in U.S. history. Across newspapers, radio, and posters, a single message echoed everywhere. Surrender your gold. Save your country. Headlines declared that hoarding gold was unpatriotic, even selfish. Owning gold was no longer a sign of responsibility. It was portrayed as an act against recovery. Banks displayed signs, "Turn in your gold, do your part." Radio hosts urged listeners to think of it as a civic duty. The message was simple. If you loved your country, you would comply. If you resisted, you were hurting everyone else. The campaign worked. Within days, Americans began walking into banks with small envelopes and boxes, coins, rings, savings passed down through generations. They didn't see it as losing wealth. They saw it as helping their nation recover. But the trade was hardly fair. For every ounce of gold, the government paid a fixed price, $20.67. No matter the market value, no matter its sentimental worth. It was non-negotiable. Those who hesitated were reminded of the punishment, a $10,000 fine or 10 years in prison. Fear did the rest. By May 1st, 1933, banks were flooded. Lines wrapped around city blocks. Mothers brought wedding rings. Fathers carried coins meant for their children. Families walked in together, quiet, obedient, handing over their gold for thin stacks of paper. Paper that would soon lose value as more money was printed. By the end of May, nearly 3,000 tons of gold had been surrendered, worth about $10 billion in today's money. When combined with bank and business holdings, the U.S. government now controlled over 3,600 tons. It was one of the largest forced transfers of private wealth in modern history. Gold that once sat in homes and vaults across America was now locked away in government storage, all in the name of economic stability. They didn't yet realize what was coming next. Less than a year later, Roosevelt signed the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. Hidden within it was a stunning change. The official price of gold was raised from $20.67 to $35 per ounce. Overnight, its value jumped almost 70%. Every ounce the government had taken suddenly became worth far more. The Treasury made an instant profit of about $2.8 billion, nearly half the entire federal budget. Citizens who turned in their gold for $20 watched helplessly as its value soared. They couldn't buy it back. Ownership was still illegal. The government held it all. A silent wealth transfer on a scale few ever understood. Not everyone complied. A businessman named Frederick Barber Campbell refused to surrender his gold. He argued the order violated the Fifth Amendment, protection against property seizure without fair compensation. He took his case to court, fighting for years, spending his fortune. In 1935, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against him. Congress, it said, had the power to regulate money, even if that meant confiscating gold. Campbell lost everything. He suffered a heart attack during the hearings and never recovered. His defeat sent a clear message. The government's control over money was absolute. Still, many Americans hid their gold. Coins were buried in backyards, bars hidden behind walls, some smuggled overseas. The government fought back. Banks reported suspicious activity. Neighbors informed on neighbors for rewards. Federal agents investigated thousands of cases. Some were fined, others jailed. Many simply lost everything when their secret gold was found. By 1936, the resistance had faded. The government now possessed more gold than ever before and needed somewhere to keep it. Walls a meter thick, reinforced with steel and concrete. A 20-ton vault door, its code divided among several people so no one could open it alone. By 1941, Fort Knox held more than 650 million ounces of gold, over half the world's entire supply. Most of it had once belonged to ordinary citizens. Inside those vaults lay the collective wealth of a nation, melted, recast, and sealed under armed guard. Did it work? Economists still argue. Some say Roosevelt's policy stabilized the dollar and restored confidence. Others call it a betrayal, the state enriching itself while robbing its people. What's certain is that the world never returned to the old system. The gold standard was dead. In its place rose a new belief that a currency's value rests not on metal, but on trust, in the government behind it. And that trust, as history shows, can be as fragile as paper. Today, the United States claims to hold over 8,000 tons of gold, most of it in Fort Knox and other hidden vaults. But here's the twist. No independent audit has verified it since 1974. For more than 50 years, those doors have remained shut. Politicians, journalists, even foreign governments have asked to see inside, always denied. So no one truly knows how much gold remains. Some believe it's all still there. Others think much of it has been leased or sold. Either way, the same system that once took gold from its citizens still guards its secrets today. The events of 1933 were never just about economics. They were about control, the power of a government to redefine money, rewrite value, and reshape the bond between people and the state. What began as a desperate response to crisis became a defining moment in modern finance. It proved that even in a democracy, the line between personal freedom and national necessity can vanish overnight. Millions surrendered their gold believing they were saving their country. In truth, they were witnessing the birth of a new financial era, one built not on gold, but on trust, policy, and power. And that trust is still being tested today. The gold may have vanished from American homes, but its absence created something far bigger. A new kind of money, built not on metal, but on trust. When Roosevelt broke the link between gold and the dollar, he didn't just change US policy. He changed how the entire world understood value. For the first time, money was no longer tied to something tangible. It was tied to the promises of those in power. At first, that system seemed to work. The government could print more dollars, fund recovery programs, and expand the economy. Confidence slowly returned. Factories reopened, people went back to work. And most Americans believed the sacrifice of their gold had saved the nation. But underneath the recovery, something fundamental had shifted. Money had become political. Its value could now be altered not by supply and demand, but by decision and decree. That's the real legacy of 1933, the moment when economic control moved from the people's hands to the government's desk. For decades after, the gold confiscation faded from memory. New wars, new technologies, new crises, all buried the story. But the foundation it built continued to shape everything. The US dollar, once backed by gold, was now backed by confidence and power. Then came 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement. World leaders met to design a post-war economy. They decided that all major currencies would be pegged to the US dollar, and the dollar itself would still be linked to gold. On paper, it looked like a return to order. In reality, the system now rested entirely on trust in America, and only one nation controlled the gold. Fort Knox became not just a vault, but the foundation of global finance. Every central bank, every foreign government held dollars because they believed those dollars could be exchanged for gold if they ever needed to. But by the 1960s, the math stopped working. The US was printing more dollars than it had gold to back them. The Vietnam War, social programs, and massive debt stretched the system to its limits. Countries like France began asking for their gold back. And that's when the illusion finally broke. In 1971, President Richard Nixon announced what many now call the Nixon shock. He ended the convertibility of dollars into gold. Just like that, the US officially abandoned the gold standard, and the dollar became pure paper. The world's currencies were now floating, their value determined by markets, politics, and central banks, not metal. From that moment on, money was no longer wealth. It was a system of belief, and whoever controlled the supply controlled everything. Over the next decades, this new form of money fueled unprecedented growth and unprecedented debt. Governments could borrow without limits. Banks could create credit with a few keystrokes. The economy became digital long before computers took over. But the spirit of 1933 never really disappeared. The same logic, that the public must give up control for the greater good, still echoes in modern finance. In 2008, during the global financial crisis, billions were created out of thin air to rescue banks and corporations. Ordinary citizens, once again, paid the price through inflation and taxes. The tools had changed, the principle had not. And now, as the world moves toward digital currencies, some fear history might repeat itself, just in a new form. Central bank digital currencies promise speed, transparency, and security. But they also grant governments total oversight, every transaction traceable, every wallet controllable. If money becomes fully programmable, then control over gold in 1933 might look like only the beginning. It's easy to believe these things could never happen again, that governments today wouldn't dare seize assets or restrict access to wealth. They always do what they believe is necessary. And that's exactly what Roosevelt believed in 1933. For most Americans, the gold confiscation feels like ancient history, a story buried in dusty archives. But its fingerprints are on every dollar printed today, every debt ceiling raised, every inflation chart that spikes on your screen. Because the truth is, once money lost its anchor, it became a tool of policy, not a store of value. So what's the lesson? It's not that gold is sacred. It's that control over money means control over freedom. In 1933, people lost that control without realizing it. They trusted that the system was built to protect them. And maybe for a time it did. But it also created a world where trust replaced gold, and power replaced accountability. Today, the gold remains locked behind steel doors in Fort Knox, if it's still there at all. No one outside the government has seen it for 50 years, and maybe that's fitting, because the real vault isn't made of concrete and steel anymore. It's digital. It lives in servers, banks, and screens, invisible, yet more powerful than ever. The story of 1933 isn't just about gold. It's about how easily freedom can be traded for security and how quickly temporary measures become permanent systems. It's a reminder that money is never just about wealth. It's about trust, control, and belief. And as long as those who create money also control its meaning, the lesson of 1933 will never truly be over. If this story opened your eyes to how money and power really work, hit subscribe, because this is just one chapter in a much bigger story.